Welcome to The Explainer. We all ask this huge question, is our economy fair? And the answer isn't just about opinions, it's about data. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the essential tools economists use to measure income inequality. All right, let's just put it right out there. Is our economy fair? You hear this question everywhere, right? From dinner table debates to major political campaigns. But to find a real answer, economists have to turn away from all that noise and focus on the data, using some very specific tools to get a clear picture. Okay, so first things first. Before we can measure fairness, we've got to be on the same page about what we're even looking for. And at its core, income inequality isn't as complicated as it sounds. It's simply about how the total economic pie gets divided up among everyone in a society. To really get a handle on this, let's strip it all down to the absolute basics. We're going to imagine the simplest economy possible and see what this whole slicing the pie thing actually looks like in practice. So, check this out. Imagine a tiny economy with just two people. The total income is $20,000. Person A makes $5,000 and person B makes $15,000. That means person B is earning 3 times more than person A. For every single dollar person A takes home, person B takes home 3. That split, 25% versus 75%, is our first concrete look at inequality. Yeah, obviously, that's not an equal split. In a perfectly equal world, what would it be? 50-50, right? They'd both get half. So that gap, the space between the ideal 50-50 scenario and the actual 25-75 reality, that is precisely what we mean when we talk about inequality. Okay, now let's scale this up to a really extreme example. Picture an economy where 100 families together earn half of all the income. But then, a single, very wealthy individual earns the other half, all by themselves. Think about that for a second. While one person walks away with 50% of the entire pie, each of those 100 families is left with just a 0.5% crumb. And that right there is a classic picture of a high inequality society. You can probably see the historical parallels, right? It's kind of like an old-school monarchy where a ruler might control the vast majority of a nation's wealth, leaving pretty much everyone else with just the leftovers. So these simple examples are great for getting the idea across. But how do economists measure this for an entire country with millions of people? They can't compare every single person one by one. So they rely on 2 really powerful tools to get a clear scientific picture. The first is a graph called the Lorenz Curve, which we're about to build together. The second is something called the Gini Index. Just think of the Gini Index as the final score, a single number that's actually calculated from the Lorenz Curve. So to understand the score, you first have to understand the graph. So let's do it. Let's build this Lorenz curve. I promise, once you see how it's constructed, you'll have this powerful visual key for unlocking the whole story of income distribution in pretty much any society. We start with a simple graph. Along the bottom, that's the x-axis, we line up the cumulative percentage of families, starting from the poorest and moving to the wealthiest. And up the side, the y-axis, we track the cumulative percentage of the total income they all earn. The very first thing we draw is this perfect 45-degree diagonal line. This is called the line of perfect equality. It represents a perfectly fair world, a place where the poorest 30% of people have exactly 30% of the money, the bottom 80% have 80%, and so on. This straight line is our ideal baseline. Okay, but now we plot the real data against that ideal line. For example, we might find that the poorest 30% of families actually earn only 5% of the total income. So we find that spot and boom, we plot a point. Then we keep going. We find the bottom 80% of families have a combined 50% of the income, and we plot that point too. And when we connect these real-world data points from 0 all the way up to where 100% of families have 100% of the income, we get a curve that, well, it sags below our line of perfect equality. This sagging line is the Lorenz curve. And here is the absolute key takeaway. That gap, the space between the perfect ideal and the messy reality, is a direct, visual measurement of inequality. The more that real curve sags away from the straight line, the greater the income inequality is in that economy. It's that simple. So what does this curve reveal when we zoom out and look at the bigger picture? What does its shape truly tell us about a society? It's pretty straightforward, actually. A country with lower inequality will have a Lorenz curve that hugs that line of equality pretty closely. But in a society with higher inequality, that curve is going to bow way, way out, creating a much larger gap between the ideal and the reality. And that's the real power of this thing.
The Lorenz curve isn't just some abstract graph for academics. It's like a photograph of an economy. It gives us an instant, intuitive snapshot that shows not just if there's inequality, but it reveals the very structure of how wealth is shared.
And that leaves us with a final thought to consider. Now that you understand how this works, take a moment and just picture this graph in your head. Where would you imagine the curve for your own society falls today? How far does it really sag from that line of perfect equality?
Hey everyone, what if I told you we could measure the fairness of an entire country's economy with just one number? Well, today we're going to dive into a pretty amazing tool that tries to do exactly that, the Gini Coefficient.
I mean, think about it. It sounds kind of impossible, right? How do you boil down all the complexity of millions of people, all their jobs, all their incomes, into one single number you can actually compare? That's the puzzle we're going to tackle today.
And to understand this really big idea, we're going to start super small. Let's forget about big, complex nations for a second. We're going to build our own little economy from the ground up, with just 6 families.
Right, so welcome to our tiny 6-family economy. By looking at how things work here, we're going to uncover the exact same principles that economists use to look at entire countries. It all starts here.
So, let's meet the residents. In our little community, we've got 3 families in what we'll call Group A, and they each earn $1,000. Then you've got 2 families in Group B doing a little better at $1,500 each, and then there's one higher earning family, Group C, bringing in $4,000. Pretty simple, right? This is our starting point, just the raw numbers.
Okay, now this is where it starts to get interesting, because raw numbers are just a list, right? But when we start turning them into percentages, that's when the real story, the hidden structure of our economy, starts to pop out.
First thing we do is sort our families from lowest income to highest. Group A, the 3 families, they make up half our population, 50%. Group B is the next 33%, and that single family in Group C is the last 17%. Now pay attention to this cumulative column. It's just a running total, so the bottom 50% of people are all in Group A. Then when we add in Group B, we see that the bottom 83% of our families are in those 2 groups combined. We're just stacking them up.
All right, now for the important part. Let's follow the money. The total income in our little economy is $10,000. Group A earns 30% of that pie. Group B also gets 30%. And Group C, that one family, gets the remaining 40%. Now look at those 2 cumulative columns side by side. You can already see the gap, can't you? The bottom 50% of families have only 30% of the income. The bottom 83% of families have only 60%. These 2 columns, cumulative families and cumulative income, they are the key to this whole thing.
Tables are great and all, but a picture is where this really comes to life. So let's take these numbers and turn them into a shape. We're about to actually see the inequality in our little economy. So here's how we'll set up our graph. Along the bottom, the x-axis, we're going to track the families from 0 to 100%. And up the side, the y-axis, we'll track their share of the income, also from 0 to 100%. It's that simple.
But before we plot our data, let's just imagine for a second a perfectly fair world. In that world, the first 10% of people would have exactly 10% of the money. 50% of the people would have 50% of the money. You get the idea. It would make a perfect, straight 45-degree line. We call this the line of perfect equality. It's our ideal, our baseline for a perfectly fair society.
Okay, now let's plot our families. We know from our table that the bottom 50% of families have 30% of the income. Boom, there's our first point. And the bottom 83% have 60% of the income. There's our second point. Now, when we connect the dots, we get this curve that sags underneath the perfect line. This is the Lorenz curve, and it's a picture of reality. That gap between the straight line and our curve, that is, visually, the inequality in our society.
So that visual is really powerful, right? You can see the gap, but it's not a number. We can't compare it easily. How do we actually measure the size of that gap? Well, that's where the Gini coefficient finally makes its entrance.
Think of it this way. The Lorenz curve is like a detailed photograph of inequality. It shows you everything, all the details. The Gini coefficient, on the other hand, is the headline. It takes that whole picture and summarizes it into one single, powerful number.
Really, at its heart, the Gini is just a ratio. It's a clever way of asking a simple question. How big is that gap of inequality compared to the total possible space for inequality? It's the real world versus the perfect world.
Now, the calculation sounds complicated, but the idea is beautiful. We just call that gap between the lines Area A. And the whole triangle under the line of perfect equality, that's area A plus area B. The Gini coefficient is simply area A divided by the total area of A plus B. That's it. It's just the percentage of the total space that's taken up by that inequality gap.
So after we run the numbers for our little six-family world, what do we get? We get a Gini coefficient of 0.281. And there you have it. We took our whole economy, all six families, and we distilled it all down into that one single number. But what does 0.281 even mean? Is that good? Is that bad? A number on its own is pretty useless, right? So we have to put it on a scale to really understand what it's telling us.
The Gini scale is super simple. It goes from 0 to 1. A Gini of 0 means perfect equality. I mean, everyone has the exact same income. The Lorenz curve would lie right on top of that line of perfect equality. A Gini of 1, that's perfect inequality. It means one person has all the money and everyone else has absolutely nothing. So our 0.281, it's somewhere in the middle of those two extremes.
So let's wrap this up. Here's what you gotta remember. The Lorenz curve gives us the picture of inequality, but the Gini coefficient gives it a score. It's this awesome number between 0 and 1 that lets us compare different economies or see how one economy is changing over time. And remember, the lower the Gini number, the more equally that economic pie is being shared.
And that really leaves us with one last big question. The Gini is just a number, a statistic, but behind that number are millions of real people, real families. So when we see a country's Gini score go up or down, what does that actually feel like for the people living there? What does it mean for their opportunities, their futures, and their lives? That's something to think about.